Hey, what's good, everybody? I'd like to welcome you guys back to the Boombox Guru channel. I'm your host, LB. So today's video, we're going to be doing a discography review on one of the greatest thrash metal bands of all time, known as Slayer. Now, for this video, I wanted to focus on their albums from that first era, from 1983 to 1990. Mainly because personally for me, that's my favorite era of Slayer. Although I do like the albums that they did later in their career, but I just wanted to focus on this particular era because I feel that it's the one that had the most impact. It was very groundbreaking. It was a landmark era for the band, and it was very influential into the development of extreme metal. And these are the albums, when it comes to Slayer, these are the albums that I listen to the most. So I feel I would have much more of a easier time talking about these records than the later ones, because I would have to really go back and deep dive into the later ones that I have in order to talk about that. But of course, Slayer, man, one of the big four of thrash metal. They did officially call it quits about 3 or 4 years ago now. Me and some friends, we were fortunate enough to actually go to that farewell tour when it came to our neck of the woods and see them, and it was a phenomenal show. It was a phenomenal show. One of the best metal shows that I have been to. Of course, this particular era is the classic lineup of Slayer. Tom Araya on bass and lead vocals, Kerry on guitars, Jeff Hanneman, R.I.P., on guitars, both of them being the principal songwriters of the band, and of course Dave Lombardo on drums. Alright, so without further ado, let's jump into this video. So first album is Show No Mercy, released in 1983 on Metal Blade Records, the band's debut record. I really like Show No Mercy. I really enjoy this record. I know a lot of people put this on their list as best Slayer albums, their favorite Slayer albums, and I can't argue with that. It is a great record. I'll tell you why I like this album so much, because it sounds quite different compared to what they would put out later. This album has more of a British heavy metal sound. It does. Now, don't get me wrong. It still has that thrash metal. A few songs still have the thrash metal like style, but most of it is geared in British heavy metal. And the three influences that I hear the most on here would be Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, and Venom. And you get a lot of that early first wave of black metal influence that Venom was very instrumental in bringing to the forefront. And the record is more melodic compared to what they would do later. Very heavy, not as creepy, not really as dark as the forthcoming albums would be, but it's still enjoyable. It's still heavy. They still have some breakneck speed on a lot of these songs. The album opener, Evil Has No Boundaries, Fight Till Death, Black Magic, The Final Command, the title track Show No Mercy. Those songs represent that breakneck speed that is more in keeping with thrash metal. Some of my favorites on here, Die by the Sword, Metal Storm, Face the Slayer, Tormentor, Cryonics, pretty much the whole entire album. I gotta say, I enjoy this whole record. There's not one weak song on this album. Lyrically, this being Slayer, it is more in line with like kind of that evil shock value. But on Show No Mercy, it's more like fantasy horror. It's not really scary. I kind of describe it as that B horror movie that you watch, even though it doesn't really scare you. You just watch it all the time because it's entertaining. That's how I would describe the lyrics. And also Tom, he hasn't really started using his classic vocal style. On here, he actually sings. So if you really want to hear what Tom Araya sounds like when he actually sings and he's not belting out the lyrics aggressively, Show No Mercy is actually one of the albums that you should check out. But I think this is an awesome debut album. There's not a bad thing about this record. From start to finish, every song on here was well written, well put together. The only drawback would probably be the production. The production isn't that great. The album was actually funded by Tom Araya. He was working as a respiratory therapist at the time. And Kerry, I believe, borrowed some money from his father. That's how the album was actually funded and put together. But this is 1983, early 80s. Metal Blade Records is still a relatively small label at the time. This is underground metal, so production really wasn't a big thing for most people, man. But for any regards, man, don't let the production hold you back. It's still a great record, one of the best one of the best thrash metal debuts of all time. So yeah, don't let criticisms about the production steer you away. It's still a great record that I highly enjoy, and that most Slayer fans highly enjoy. So yeah, Show No Mercy, released in 1983. So next is the Haunting the Chapel EP, released in 1984. And you know me, I usually don't talk about EPs that much in discography reviews, but Haunting the Chapel is very important to Slayer's career, and it's very important in their discography, because this record was the beginning of Slayer bringing forth their classic sound. So they're moving away from the British heavy metal influences. Better yet, they're taking those influences from those particular bands and they're developing their own sound. And now with here, they're beginning to become trendsetters and influencing other bands. So they shed away the more melodic moments that they had on Show No Mercy, and they go for a more faster tempo album. Tom Araya, he's no longer singing on this record. He's using that classic aggressive shouting vocal tone that will go on to define most of the records that they would do, especially in this period. But the subject matter as well, still kind of based in that horror kind of vibe, but they're also starting to talk about more like realistic things more reality. But it's still kind of based in that more like horror stuff, but it comes off more authentic. The evil shock value that they have on here is just more authentic. It's more disturbing. It's a bit more creepier. It's basically eye-raising this time. On this album, but this EP, I think they wanted to like kind of tick some people off and kind of like get them scared as well. I think that was the whole purpose, man. But yeah, although it was only a 3-song EP originally, because the CD versions include 4 songs, the bonus track Aggressive Perfector, which I think that song was originally on one of the Metal Massacre compilations. If any of you that's watching this video, maybe leave a comment to let me know which Metal Massacre it appeared on. But yeah, this was a huge turning point in Slayer's career, man, because this is where they really started to become very influential to other bands. This is where you started to get that more classic style that would define the remainder of their career, especially in this decade. But yeah, Haunting the Chapel, even though it may be 4 songs, it's still something that is worth listening to. It's still something that is worth having in your collection as a Slayer fan, because it just holds such a huge significance. So definitely pick this up if you come across it. I don't know if you really can find individual copies like this anymore, because they started kind of like using these songs as bonus tracks, but it's definitely worth having in your collection if you're a Slayer fan. All right, so now we're getting to the next album, which is Slayer's second record. This is Hell Awaits, released in 1985 with Metal Blade Records. This would also be their last album on Metal Blade Records. So, man, let's talk about this record. Hands down, Hell Awaits is Slayer's scariest record. All right, even by today, as I speak now in 2022, this album is disturbing. It is scary. I have personal friends who were of age when this album came out back in 85, and they even say that now that when they listen to it, it's still disturbing. It's still scary. And I concur with that, man, because this is where, man, this is Slayer at their most creepiest. This is Slayer at their most darkest. So I was reading up on this album, and Kerry King and Jeff Hanneman, them being the principal songwriters, they were listening to a lot of Merciful Fate when they was recording and writing for this album. So a lot of the songs are longer in length. That's why there's only 7 songs on the album, because these songs are very long and it's more kind of like progressive. And the production on here is a big improvement over Show No Mercy, because it just has this very dark kind of like evil and creepy atmosphere that really helps to enhance like the songs and the concepts behind the songs. So that goes a huge long way into giving you that kind of disturbing feeling that this album gives you, man. And Tom Araya vocally, man, I think Tom is at his most demented on this record, man. I mean, he's really scaring you with the way he just belts out those lyrics and the aggressive tone to him. I mean, it's crazy, man. Also, he got his first writing credit as a lyricist on this album called At Dawn They Sleep. I don't think it was actually the first song in Slayer that he wrote the lyrics to, because he did allude to in an interview that it was the first song that he got credit for writing the lyrics. So he might have wrote lyrics on a few songs on Haunting the Chapel and Show No Mercy. But At Dawn They Sleep, that's become a big Slayer fan favorite. I think it's about vampires, I believe. But let me tell you, man, this is a scary song. The title track, Hell Awaits, man. That I remember one time I was listening to this album and I think it had started over, and you know that beginning part where it's like, join us. It's like backmass. I had the album up too loud, and it kind of just woke me up out of my sleep. And I was like, whoa. And I had to turn it down because I thought I was having a nightmare. So that goes to show you how disturbing this record can be, man. And it's amazing, too, at the same time. Because, 1985, so that's about 37 years now? 37 years this record has been out, and it still manages to scare people. That shows you how timeless this album has become. And I also want to point out that this record was very influential. People, I don't really hear people talk about Hell Awaits as much as they do Rain and Blood, but this record had a lot to do with influencing a lot of that second wave of black metal that was happening in the mid 1980s, as well as death metal. So a lot of the concepts, the production, the musical style, a lot of that went into the development of those burgeoning subgenres that was happening in the mid 80s. I just don't hear people talk about this record that much when it comes to it, but I think people in the know how influential this record is, man. But so many great songs from start to finish. Again, not a weak moment on this album. I really enjoy it, even though sometimes I'm a bit reluctant to listen to it. It's not a record that I would listen to like driving home at night. You know what I'm saying? I'm just being honest with you, but nonetheless, a great record. Better songwriting, production was a big improvement this time around, and one of Slayer's best records, one of the greatest albums in my opinion. I think most people put this on their list as one of Slayer's best and greatest albums, and I have to agree. They really stepped it up with this one, and you could say this album was a bridge to what they would later do with the coming albums, man. But just a great record. Of course, like I said, their last one with Metal Blade Records, as they would end up leaving and signing with Def Jam, because Rick Rubin would end up coming to the fold. And that is a good segue into this next album, Rain and Blood, released in 1986 on Def Jam Recordings originally. The CD has Def American, but originally this came out on Def Jam Recordings, man. The first Slayer album that I ever heard, actually the song Angel of Death, that was actually on Vice City, GTA Vice City. It was on the V-Rock station, the hard rock and heavy metal station. Angel of Death actually appeared on there. But I remember, I think I first heard this like around high school maybe. I was reading something about Def Jam Recordings, and it brought up Slayer being signed to the label, and it really amazed me. I was like, whoa, a thrash metal band was signed to Def Jam? And this is 1986. This is when Def Jam was a hip-hop label. I mean, Def Jam is still known for hip-hop, but I'm saying this is the golden age of hip-hop. You got LL Cool J, you got the Beastie Boys, and like Public Enemy's fitting to come out, and so forth. Crush Groove, all that good stuff. And in the midst of that, Rick Rubin signed Slayer to that label and put out this record, one of two albums to come out on the label, Rain and Blood. But what a groundbreaking record, a landmark album in thrash metal, a game changer. I always say that Metallica's Kill 'Em All is the album that started the thrash metal movement, but Rain and Blood is the one that took it to the next level. It took it to the next level. If you listen to a lot of the second wave of thrash metal bands that were coming out in the mid to late 80s, a lot of them were trying to sound like Rain and Blood. A lot of them were. You listen to a lot of the debut albums from those second wave thrash metal bands. They were trying to be just as heavy and intense as Slayer was on Rain and Blood. I think the only band that really came close or came equal or even further than Rain and Blood would probably be Dark Angel when they did their Darkness Descends album. Because I believe Darkness Descends came out the same year. I think that's probably the only band that really came close to it. But, you know, Rain and Blood, such a groundbreaking record, very influential to death metal. I remember I watched an interview to Alex Webster from Cannibal Corpse that he did, and he talked about how Rain and Blood, how the first time they heard Rain and Blood, it just changed their lives, and it changed the way that they played. I mean, so many great songs on here, man. I mean, Rick Rubin produced this record, so the production on here is even more improvement over what they did on the two previous records. And, you know, so many signature songs on here. You know, the first track, Angel of Death, which is about, you know, the Holocaust, that one of the concentration camps, Auschwitz. Piece by Piece, Necrophobic, Altar of Sacrifice, Criminally Insane, Reborn, Epidemic. That song is pretty much a death metal song. If you listen to the riffs, if you listen to the drumming on that record, that's pretty much a death metal song right there. Postmortem, or Raining Blood. And, you know, this record was just so heavy. It was so fast. It was so intense. I think the record clocked in at like 29 minutes, I believe. I believe it was like 29 minutes that this record clocked in, because apparently if you had this album on cassette tape, you actually the whole album was on both sides, basically. The whole album was on both sides. So once side one ended, you put it on side two, and the album basically just starts over from Angel of Death. That's how short the record was. And it was just something that the band wanted to do. They just wanted to play fast, and they wanted to play heavy. And it had a profound effect on, you know, later bands. Because like I said, a lot of those second wave thrash metal bands were trying to be like Rain and Blood. You can hear it in a lot of their songs on their debut albums. But just a groundbreaking record. You know, 1986 was a great year for metal, especially for the Big Four. I mean, three of the Big Four albums came out that year. You know, Master of Puppets, Megadeth's Peace Sells, and then Rain and Blood. And all those albums have gone on to be considered some of the greatest and best selling of most of their careers, man. And just awesome, man. Cover art, one of the best cover arts in metal, in my opinion. Also like the back cover of the band. But just so many great tracks on here. And of course the CD version is longer because it has bonus tracks. Aggressive Perfector appears on here again, as well as a remix of Criminally Insane. But yeah, just a groundbreaking record. There's so much that can be said about Rain and Blood, but I mean, this album still continues to be talked about today, and it still continues to be an influential record to bands now. So just a great record, man. Quintessential Slayer right here. All right, so next is South of Heaven, released in 1988. This would be their second and last release on Def Jam recordings. So for South of Heaven, the band, they did the opposite thing. I think most people were taken back about South of Heaven. I think most people were expecting a Rain and Blood 2, but the band didn't want to do that. You know, they toured for Rain and Blood, and Kerry King said in the interview that they were tired of playing, you know, fast. You know, although there are still fast moments on South of Heaven, you know, it's, to me, the songwriting is just taken up even more on this record. But they wanted to slow things down. And then you get that in the first track, South of Heaven, which I think is one of Slayer's greatest songs, in my personal opinion, man. I really dig the whole slow and doomy the slow and doomy intro, first part of that song, and then the more mid-tempo range that they take. And I really like Tom Araya's lyrics on that song. Very poetical. Most people think that on South of Heaven he's talking about hell, but he's not. He's actually talking about Earth. He's actually talking about the world. So with South of Heaven, lyrically, I think that this is where the band were moving away from the more evil shock value lyrics, and they started to focus more on the evils of reality. They started to talk about subjects that were actually happening in our world, which, if you think about it, that's more disturbing than some kind of like fantasy horror type stuff that they were doing earlier. They're talking about things that actually are happening around us, and a lot of this stuff is still relevant to the day. You know, songs like Silent Scream, where that's a song that's actually about abortion. I don't know if it's a pro-life song. I don't know if that was Tom's intent. I mean, although we know where he stands politically these days, I don't know if that's what his intent was with the song at the time. But lyrically, he graphically and vividly describes like the process of it, and it's hair raising. It's hair raising. I know there's a YouTube channel I used to watch on here called Vin and Sorry. They do reactions to metal music, and I remember they did a reaction to Silent Scream, and when they heard Tom's vocals, when they heard his lyrics, their whole expression just changed. I mean, they were like stone faced when they heard his lyrics. So if you ever get a chance, listen to the lyrics of what he's saying. It's very disturbing, but I like it, not because it's disturbing, because the way Tom put it together. Tom is a great lyricist, and I don't think he got enough credit in Slayer for being a great lyricist. And you know, Mandatory Suicide, let's see, Behind the Crooked Cross, Ghost of War, that's one of my favorites. Let's see here, Cleanse the Soul, Descended Aggressor, which is a Judas Priest cover. They do an excellent job at covering that Judas Priest song, Descended Aggressor. Spill the Blood. I enjoy every song on this record. I'm not sure if track number 3 is, I don't know if it's called Live Undead or Live Undead. I'm not really sure, but just a lot of great songs on here, man. People were a little ticked off that the band kind of like slowed things down and they didn't do a Rain and Blood Part 2. But I'm glad that they took a risk and did something different. And in my personal opinion, South of Heaven, it's one of my top 3 albums. I did a top 3 video on Slayer, my top 3 Slayer albums, and South of Heaven made that list. And because it's a great record, and I like that they moved away from the evil shock value lyrics, and they really started to tackle like reality based subjects. I really like that. To me that's better than just trying to scare people off of like horror movie inspired type lyrics. I really like that they moved away from that, and I really like that they took risk with their sound. They did something different while still remaining Slayer. So I really did this record, man. But I think South of Heaven is one of their greatest records. I think the songwriting on here is really great. You know, just a great record, man. I really enjoy this. To me, Rain and Blood, South of Heaven, and the next record we're going to talk about, I think they all form a trilogy of classic material for the band. So that brings us to the last album in this video, which is Seasons in the Abyss, released in 1990. Yeah, I think out of those 3, Rain and Blood, South of Heaven, Seasons is my favorite. And I'm going to tell you why. For one, because Tom Araya wrote a lot more lyrics on this record. I think Tom wrote the most lyrics that Tom wrote on a Slayer album is on Seasons. And I also like that, oh dang, what was I going to say about this record? Oh, that to me, Seasons combines the elements of Rain and Blood and South of Heaven. So I consider this to be the band's most complete work. And Kerry King actually even said that in an interview around the time when this record was released, that he considers Seasons to be their most complete work. But you know, the record starts off with a fast opener, War Ensemble, which kind of has remnants of Angel of Death from Rain and Blood. But there's a lot of fast moments, and there's just a lot of slower moments, but it's a good balance of it. Like great track sequencing. there's just a good balance of where they bring in the fast numbers, but then they know how to take it down, kind of take things down a little bit, notch, then bring it back up. There's just a good balance of all that throughout the record, man. And I also like the subject matter. I like how Tom, he kind of took the band lyrically, he took it more to like social commentary. Because a song like Expendable Youth is actually about LA gang violence, which is something that the band members are familiar with because they're from LA. And some of them even grew up in neighborhoods that had gangs. I know Tom said in an interview that one of his first neighborhoods he grew up in before he moved to, I believe it was Huntington Park. He grew up in another neighborhood that had gangs. So he touched on that a little bit in the interview. But, you know, Expendable Youth, it talks about LA gang violence, man. How these gangs are out here just killing each other, and there's really not much being done about it. Of course, you got a song like Dead Skin Mask, which touches on serial killer Ed Gein, which a lot of metal bands really have talked about. Hallowed Point is one of my favorites on this record. And interesting enough, a lot of people consider Hallowed Point to be a weak moment on the record, and I don't understand what people are talking about when they say Hallowed Point is a weak song. I've seen a lot of people call Hallowed Point the weakest song on here. How can that song be weak? This is Tom describing to you what happens when you get shot with a hollow point bullet. He's like vividly describing that. How can that be a weak song? And then the music that surrounds this fast tempo song, to me, it kind of exemplifies the adrenaline of what possibly could happen if you get shot in a situation like this. You know what I'm saying? I don't understand how people say that that's a weak song. Let's see, Temptation. I like Temptation. I believe that's a Kerry King one. I think Kerry King wrote that song. But there was actually an era behind that song. Apparently, you know, there's like two like vocals like running kind of like simultaneously together. I believe like Kerry wanted Tom to sing on. Yeah, here it is on Wikipedia. It says track 8. Temptation featured an overdub of lead vocalist Tom Araya singing. The vocal arrangement on the track was unintentional. Araya sang the song twice. Once the way he felt it sounded best. The second time at the insistence of Kerry King the way he thought it should be sung. By accident, both tracks were played back simultaneously. King liked the way it sounded together, and so it was left that way for the final version. Yeah, so happy accidents. Happy accidents. R.I.P. to Bob Ross, man. But yeah, that's one of those cases where a happy accident actually works out in your favor, man. But I like how the overdub is, you know, where you hear Tom singing on this part and then it comes back in on that part. It kind of makes the song a little bit more creepier, in my opinion. Born of Fire is another one of my favorite ones, man. Another fast thrash metal, another fast-paced thrash banger on there. I think that's another Kerry King one. Then of course, the title track, Seasons in the Abyss, man. What a great track. I really like Seasons in the Abyss. That is another one of Slayer's greatest songs. And Tom actually, I didn't realize that Tom wrote the lyrics to Seasons in the Abyss. But that is a wonderful song, man. I mean, it's not a fast number. It's more of a slow mid-tempo number. I mean, it starts off kind of doomy and slow, and then it picks up in the with a mid-tempo. But the song is almost progressive in nature. The way it comes across is kind of progressive in nature. That's what I like so much about the track. And it's even better if you watch the video as well, because that video was amazing. I think that's one of the greatest heavy metal videos of all time. But yeah, Seasons, you know, this album really kind of, I would say that this was the best way to end this era of Slayer. It was the best way to cap off this era of Slayer, man, because they took everything from their previous works and they all just kind of brought it in together. It all just came into one fold. It all gelled together and culminated in Seasons, man, which I think is one of their greatest records of all time, man. But just a remarkable record. Like I said, I think the top 3 Slayer albums, and I believe Seasons, I don't know if I did it in order. I don't think I ranked them. I think I just talked about them. But if I had to rank them, you know, between Rain and Blood, South of Heaven, and Seasons, I think Seasons would be my number 1, honestly. I just really enjoy it. I like that Tom wrote more lyrics on here, and I like how he brought more social issues into their sound. You know, instead of the whole like evil shock value and so forth, man. Honestly, you could say that Seasons is probably Slayer's most accessible record. It's their most accessible one, man. You could say it's probably this one and South of Heaven are probably the ones that are the more easiest to get into, to kind of wean somebody into. You know what I'm saying? That may not be all that familiar with Slayer, or that may be a little bit apprehensive. These two albums are probably the best ones to kind of gradually move somebody into Slayer. But just a remarkable record. I enjoy it so much, man. One of the greatest releases, man. Seasons in the Abyss. And that's it for this video. You know, I just wanted to focus on that first era of Slayer from 83 to 1990, which is my favorite era of the band. These are the ones that I listen to the most. Maybe, I don't know, maybe later this year, I don't know, we get into the end of this year, but I don't know, maybe Laura willing, sometime later I'll tackle the next era, which would be the 90s, you know, starting with Divine Intervention. I was gonna leave Seasons for like the 90s discography review, but I felt that record belonged with these records. I felt that Seasons belonged with this first era of Slayer, in my personal opinion. I think that the Divine Intervention, you know, it coming out in 1994, I think that kind of marked a different period for Slayer, because up until 2006, Seasons was the last album that they did with Dave Lombardo. He ended up leaving the band after Seasons, and then Paul Bostaph came in, and so you have that era of the band. So I felt it was only right that I end this particular video with Seasons, man. But yes, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I had a lot of fun talking about these albums, because, you know, I've listened to these albums so much that it was just, I did this on a whim, as you can tell. You might can tell, but I did this on a whim. There was no like script or any guidelines going by this, because I've listened to these albums so much that it's just easy for me to talk about them and to give my personal thoughts on them. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy it, please hit that thumbs up and give me a like. It helps with the algorithm. Also, be sure to hit the subscribe button and tap that bell. That way you'll be notified whenever I drop new content. I also want to thank everybody who's been watching the videos, everybody that subscribed to the channel. I truly appreciate it. And as always, hope everybody has a blessed day, a blessed week, and love, peace, and music. Peace out, y'all.